World events dragging down Australia's economy. Let's have a look. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Florian Heise, and welcome to another episode of Heise Says. I have my stein of coffee, and I thought, what would be good to relax on a Saturday afternoon, but to go through this article, an interview with Reserve Bank of Australia Governor Philip Lowe, where he discusses his fears for Australia's economy and makes reference to how we really seem to be at the whim of world events. And, from everything from economics to our impact on climate change, a lot of people don't seem to realize how small Australia really is. I mean, come on. The only reason we have a budget surplus at the moment is because of an iron ore spike driven by demand from China, and because Brazil, the second largest manufacturer of iron ore in the world, had flooding disasters. So, yeah, it's all very well planned out. I've read some of this article. I think it's quite interesting what he talks about money. So let's have a read. Get your stein of coffee ready. Relaxing Saturday. So, what's going wrong with Australia? RBA Chief Philip Lowe fears the economy's time is up. I mean, does that scream confidence? He catches public transport to the office, and if anyone asks, says he works in a bank. Reserve Bank Governor Philip Lowe may be low-key by nature, but he calls for bosses to grant workers a decent pay rise have thrust him firmly into the spotlight. It's easy to make calls for bosses to give workers a decent pay rise, but there needs to be money coming in to fund it. It's that simple. When you have, good workers that you're happy, every business owner will do what he can, or she, to ensure they remain happy and productive. It's just that simple. Money today may be largely electronic. Well, even more electronic if the cash ban goes through. Yet hidden vaults of vast treasure still exist. If you were put in charge of one stack with billions of dollars in cash, would you feel just a tingle of excitement? Philip Lowe holds the key, not one, but two of the richest vaults in the country. One is the middle of Sydney, where thousands of city workers tread the pavements daily, oblivious to the billions below. The other is a super vault in the sleepy outer Melbourne suburb of Craigburn, above ground but anonymous. Opposite an old orange juice factory, robots manage the billions here, red ones. The idea of secret vaults of untold wealth has tantalized the human imagination for millennia. Real ones, from Pharaoh's tomb to Fort Knox, have been richly supplemented by the imaginary, from Alibaba's cave to Grigot's wizarding bank. Forgive me, I enjoy the Harry Potter movies. I think I read one of the books. I'm not a master fan, guys. But Lowe feels no tingle, no tantalization. He is unimpressed by his treasures. Well, they're not his, they're the bank's. You don't want to be in there, I tell you, says the Governor of the Reserve Bank of Australia. It's the odour. It's all plastics and chemicals. When people need to visit the vault beneath the RBA's Martin Place headquarters, staff switch on huge extractor fans to detox the air days in advance. The Roman Emperor Vespasian gave us the saying, money doesn't smell. Philip Lowe is here to tell us that money doesn't just smell, it stinks. Well, I think that is a beautiful analogy there. Because money, real money, doesn't smell. It doesn't smell at all. But chemical plastic that has no real intrinsic value stinks. What do you think about that, guys? I'm sure all the silver bugs, stackers, gold hoarders would appreciate that too. You hold a piece of silver or gold in your hand, there's some inherent value in that. There's some reality in that. You hold a piece of plastic, and it would stink. I think that's the best takeaway from this entire piece, and I'm gonna cheers to that one, because that observation, even if done unintentionally, just shows you the fundamental basis of a monetary system that we have at the moment. It's just based on stinky smelling plastic. Lowe is master of Australia's money. He controls the presses that print it. You'll find his signature on every banknote issued since he took the job in September 2016. He doesn't find it strange to open his wallet and see his writing on cash, because you don't look at it, do you? Though he says, I think it's strange for my children. He has 3 aged 15, 18, and 20. The governor's name appears right above the signature of the Secretary to the Treasury, the department which for the past year or so has reported to the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg. The Reserve Bank and Treasury cohabit the currency, which is easy. We are still finding out whether they can cohabit the cockpit of the Australian economy. People have been asking to do videos on free market and Austrian school. I would encourage everyone to do some research. Go to Mises.org if you want to learn a bit more about that. And I will make a video, an introduction to it. I'll add it to my list, guys, because I mean, just once you delve down into that world, in just the concept of real money and a economy that is not manipulated, because this is all a form of central planning, then the idea that you can manage with an emergent system with control of all the unintended consequences seems a bit farcical. It really does. So managing the economy intelligently to avoid a crash landing is the much harder task, especially when the two men appear to be positioned to fly the thing off in opposite directions. Lowe is worried that world events are dragging Australia into an abyss. Well, yeah, yes. Is that surprising to anyone? We're experiencing a period of major political shocks. Political shocks are turning into economic shocks. As he told the recent annual FRET session of U.S. Federal Reserve central bankers in the mountain resort of Jackson Hole, Wyoming, meaning the U.S. trade war with China, the Brexit self-harm, downturns in Europe, trauma in Hong Kong. Oh yeah, it's going crazy. The whole world is in difficult times at the moment. Brexit self-harm. I wonder if Boris will even be able to pull it off. Fundamentally, it's just such flying in the face of the will of the people. It's crazy. It's crazy. I mean, what did it take? A little over, 100 years? 105 for the votes of the common man to become meaningless in the UK? You know? Who cares what the plebeians think? Us workers, we shouldn't get a vote. No, just a ruling elite. Other countries' officials like to joke that Australia, which holds the world record for the longest economic boom of any developed nation in history, has special mystical powers so that its good times never end. Do you all think our good times never end, guys? Let me know in the comments. Business cycles don't last forever unless you're Australia, where they're in year 27, which feels like forever, US Federal Reserve Chair Jay Powell has quipped. That calendar has since flipped over to 28 years. Lowe fears that our time is up. He's using his power over interest rates to pull Australia back from the brink, but official rates are nearing 0%. Lowe is preparing the way for the eventuality that they hit zero and need to go further into the weird world of unconventional measures, a world Australia has never entered. Yes, need to go further. Just so happens to line up with Treasury introducing their cash ban. There you go. It's a world where the central bank enters the bond market and buys billions of dollars of government debt and other assets. Oh, he's talking about QE. See, for me, that isn't even unconventional anymore. I've been reading too much about what's happening around the world. Why? Because buying puts cash into the hands of sellers in the hope they might spend some of it. Yes, they will. Who holds bonds? Do the people that hold bonds? Yeah. Are they going to spend the money? No, they're not. They're just going to buy more equities. Then you'll get a slight wealth effect from equity price increases. Will it make any difference? I don't know. I don't think so. Has it made a difference? Will it be less effective? What other alternatives are there? Have they done a risk-to-reward ratio or a business case for all the different alternatives of stepping into the economy? Does that exist? If someone has seen that from the RBA, please link it to me, because it would be interesting to see if they've done these analyses. It's controversial because some conservatives argue that the state should not be able to finance its own debt, one arm of government buying debt from another. Yet the US, Japan, and the EU have all entered this world. Lowe says the method has worked. Has it? Has it worked? The US, are they looking so good? Job figures released last night. What was it? Non-farm payroll figures. It was 130,000, so 20,000 less than predicted. And then there was some comments coming, and Silver shut up, and boom, right back down. Tell what I'm watching. Maybe too closely. So this world gets much weirder when a central bank is desperate enough to cut interest rates below zero. When this first happened after the global financial crisis, it was feared that economies would fall into black holes, as the Financial Times put it. Stars would explode, swivel-eyed extraterrestrials would appear in trading rooms. Instead, economic theory is being rewritten since the GFC. A negative interest rate means that a depositor is guaranteed to lose money over time. It's a measure of deep fear, the fear of losing even more money in other investments. On the other side of the ledger, borrowers are rejoicing that interest rates on mortgages offered by a few banks in Denmark have gone negative. That's right, the bank pays the people to borrow money. Does that actually happen? People say that happens, but it doesn't make sense. Someone left a comment, or someone sent me a message on Facebook going, yeah, my parents have had negative interest rates. The bank just ups their fees. One Danish local financial consultant and father of two, Hans Peter Christensen, opened his monthly mortgage statement one day to find that his payment was a minus 0.056%. The bank paid him 249 Danish kroner, about $55 for the month. My parents said I should frame it to prove to coming generations that this ever happened. Yes, he should. He should get that framed. That's hilarious. Wow. Christensen told the Wall Street Journal, but that was 3 years ago, and negative mortgage rates are becoming more widespread in Denmark. House prices are soaring as a result, but it's still an open question whether they actually promote recovery in the wider economy. Lowe would like some help navigating through this brave new world. Is that the right term to be using? Brave new world? From Frydenberg and PM Scott Morrison. He's frustrated that they're not offering enough. An epic clash could be looming, testing the credibility and the powers of the Morrison government on the one hand, and those of Lowe's RBA on the other. That's the thing, guys. If the Australian GDP growth isn't very high, unemployment, underemployment isn't going very good in our economy here, do we need to look at does the government, does Frydenberg and Morrison, do they need to step up and actually look at some spending? Maybe take advantage of the budget surplus they have at the moment to stimulate the economy, or to reduce our debts, or try and get people working so they can get rid of our consumer debt. For a powerful man, Philip, or Phil, he doesn't mind you calling him that, as long as it's polite, Lowe wears his power lightly. Many people in peak positions make a studied effort to impose themselves on those around them in a way they dress, walk, speak, travel, shake hands, signal impatience. If anyone at a party asks him what he does for a living, he evades the question. He says he's an economist working at a bank. Yeah. Lowe's preferred drink is ginger and lemon tea. When I meet him in his ginger and lemon tea, so he doesn't down steins of coffee. See, I'm lucky I never continued with my economics degree back in the day and studied architecture. When I met him in his spacious office on the hushed 12th floor of the RBA's headquarters at the top of Martin Place, the sweeping views across Sydney Harbour to the Heads and beyond may be impressive, but the governor makes no effort to awe. He's in his shirt sleeves and wearing cufflinks made from Scrabble tiles with the letter P on his wrist and L on his other, a family gift. Well, I've got cufflinks that are Space Invaders too, and my initials are all typewriter keys. He dressed neatly, conservatively, as a central bank chief should. He speaks softly, he listens carefully, he shakes hands unself-consciously. If not dropping his daughter at school on the way to work, he catches a bus and sometimes the train too from his home in Randwick in Sydney's eastern suburbs. He doesn't court publicity and had to be convinced to be interviewed for this feature. You won't find him anywhere on social media. He's often not recognised and he likes it that way. And if anyone at a party asked him what he does for a living, he evades the question. He says he's an economist working at a bank. That's technically true, but why dodge? Yes. Well, I can imagine why he'd want to dodge it, because everyone would want to come up and have a chat to him then. If I'm at a social event, I want to escape work. Everywhere I go, like my son's soccer, people ask me about interest rates, says the man who says to them. Yeah, yeah, I can understand that. I can appreciate where he's coming from. Sometimes you just don't want to talk about work. You know, I'll give him that. The boy who grew up as one of 5 children in a family that couldn't afford to send him to university is as unpretentious as the small southwestern New South Wales town he grew up in, Cootamundra, famed for its Wattle Festival and as unassuming as its most famous son, Donald Bradman. Yet Lowe can project force. He has an unwavering gaze when he delivers a point. He also developed an uncanny knack of sometimes smiling as he speaks, even when discussing a serious subject. His intelligence is his most forceful asset, and he deploys it unsparingly. Lowe's RBA not only makes Australia's cash and the electronic version of the stuff too, there you go, there's a difference. It magically makes zeros appear on bank balance sheets and voila. But he has also paid a lot of it. 2.5 times as much as Frydenberg. Indeed, at 1.02 million, Lowe's salary is almost double that of the Prime Minister. Well, there you go. Guys, you've got to get in the banking sector while you can. Other public servants are paid more than the PM too, including the Chief Justice of the High Court, the Chief of the Defence Force, and the ABC Managing Director. Other than the heads of some government business enterprises like Australia Post, Lowe is the highest paid public official in the country. Incidentally, the RBA also runs a business. It invests and trades the national reserves, and it's pretty good at it. Last year declaring a profit of $3.8 billion and paying $668 million of that to the federal government as a dividend. So is Lowe worth $1 million a year? $1 million? I don't know. Other people have to judge that, he replies, while pointing out that his salary is set by the federal government pay setter, the Remuneration Tribunal, not by the RBA. The basic idea is that the pay is supposed to be high enough to compete with the private sector. Does anyone ever ask him if he's worth his pay? No, no one's ever been sufficiently impolite to ask that. He tells me with just a hint of indignation. But how's this for a novel concept? Lowe doesn't want a pay rise, nor even to be considered for one. The board of the RBA has discretion to award the governor extra pay for performance. Lowe has let it be known that they shouldn't even try. I said, sure, discuss my performance, but there's no point in discussing potential performance pay because I won't accept it. A banker who doesn't want more money, shockingly. Well, he's an economist first, isn't he? I'm paid very well and I'm very privileged. Not many people get paid really well, get to do what they love doing. It's really important, and I work with great people in a great organization. So what more could you want? Even more shockingly, the man who doesn't want a pay rise thinks everyone else should get one. Again and again. For 2 years now, Lowe has urged workers to ask their bosses for a rise, and he has urged bosses to give them one. The crisis the governor announced at a conference in 2017 is really in real wage growth. Oh yeah. Yep. Living standards stopped rising when the mining boom busted in 2012. People are grumpy about it. Instead of wages rising at more than 3% a year, as they had in the 5 years to 2013, the average pay rise since has fallen to 2.2% annually. After inflation, the average pay rise has been a scant 0.5%. Living standards stopped rising when the mining boom busted in 2012, says the eminent economist Ross Grant. People are grumpy about it. Even behind closed doors, Lowe argues his case. At many of the business functions I go to, business luncheons, the most common topic is how they can't find workers with the right skills. So I cheekishly say, well, why don't you pay more and poach them from another firm? Yeah, well, I've copped that. As a small business, we train up our staff and they'd all get poached. I mean, that's part of the deal. Gets annoying. And then I typically get a lesson. Well, dear boy, you have to understand it's very competitive out there. We'd love to pay our workers more. Employers feel like there's a lot of price competition out there, a lot of uncertainty, and they don't want to embed a higher cost structure. And so they're finding other ways to keep their workers happy. Yes, that's the problem. And I think a lot of it is that uncertainty out there. And it's the global issues that we'll get into in a moment. Yet without high wages to pay for people's groceries, medical care, homes, and holidays, spending is weak and the economy enfeebled. Lowe has urged government, state, and federal to lead the way, breaking their 2.5% annual limit and paying workers more. Oh, yeah, well, I would say, here's a suggestion. What about government looks at making it more affordable for people to do business and trying to find ways to cut red tape? Of course, it would help if Lowe himself led by example. Workers at the RBA subsidiary that makes banknotes took his advice last year and demanded a pay rise of 3.5%, exactly the figure Lowe recommends that bosses pay. Yet Note Printing Australia offered only 2%, the sort of level that Lowe has spent months complaining about. Well, after 3 months of acrimonious negotiation and industrial action, the company agreed to pay a 2.5% pay rise plus some better conditions, such as 5 days domestic and family violence leave. Union officials accused Lowe of hypocrisy. If even the people who literally print money won't treat their workers with respect and fairness, then clearly we have to change the rules. There's that union mark now. Change the rules, so workers can get the pay rise we deserve. The electrical trades union Victorian Secretary Troy Gray chided, even the Reserve Bank won't give the workers a pay rise willingly. Ouch. Lowe is more active on another progressive front, however, hiring more women to join the bank staff of 1,300 people. Thanks to his teenage daughter, as it happens, they've done a unit at school, obviously relates the father. My daughter has been told, if you have a mother or father with influence, you should ask them what they're doing to help women. Oh, you're kidding. So because of his daughter doing a unit at school, he's made gender-based employment decisions. Well, cool. I'm not really impressed. I firmly believe in a merit-based civilization, but I mean, then again, he's not an Austrian. He doesn't believe in the Austrian school, does he? He thinks he can control the economy by adjusting interest rates. I remember the day. I'd had a long day. I picked up my son from tennis lessons. It was 8 o'clock. I hadn't had dinner. I walked in the door and got hit with this deep question, and I fobbed her off. She said, "That's not good enough." Well, you got to step up to your child, mate. It made me think about what we were doing, particularly the demonstration effect, meaning that more women will aspire to work at the RBA and expect senior posts if there are women already doing just that. The demonstration effect. The demonstration effect. That's a new one. I haven't heard that. It sounds stupid. It really does. Demonstration effect. Wow. When Lowe first related this story in a 2017 interview, it immediately attracted the contempt of Mark Latham. Yes. Yeah, I agree. Mark, good on you. The former Labour leader used his position as a commentator on Sky News to attack the then 15-year-old Zara. I've said to the young Miss Lowe, get some interest in people unlike yourself. The disadvantaged, the poor people. That's not an attack, that's a criticism. The poor people who don't grow up in the household privileged to be the daughter of the Governor of the Reserve Bank of Australia. It's called social justice and caring about others. Zara responded with spirit. She wanted to have a joint press conference with me to respond to Latham, Lowe said. She said she could stand up next to me and she could articulate why it's important to support women. Oh, no. Okay. And how she has a broader social vision than just promoting women. It took Dad a few days to persuade his daughter that it wasn't really appropriate, as he put it. You kids kept your toes, don't they? She's quite feisty. Your kids keep you on your toes. Oh, well. The upshot. The RBA set a target that women should comprise 35% of its managers, a target that it hit last year. Well, I'm sure those women there were selected purely on merit. It just happened to be a coincidence that they achieved their target. Maybe this is why the RBA are bugging everything up. Perhaps. I don't know. All this quota crap is ludicrous. I really find it ludicrous. And there'd be a lot of women there that, an ambition, not a quota. Yeah, I know it's an ambition, not a quota, mate. But you're going to make hiring decisions, and I guarantee you will get, you will give advantages to people based on their gender. Your gender shouldn't matter. What you have, your genitals should not affect your career unless you're a prostitute. And even then, it's open to both. So, its next target is for 50%, though Lowe calls it an ambition, not a quota, and he set no deadline for achieving it. He does seem pleased to report that of the bank's 5 assistant governors, 3 are women. Oh, so women are overrepresented. Oh, boy. Well, there you go. There you go. Feminism invades the Reserve Bank. Philip Lowe's interest seemed pretty banal and routine for a 58-year-old central banker. For instance, he doesn't cook and pays no attention to food. If you can't get to bed by 10 p.m., you'll find him cycling around Centennial Park before dawn the next day. He often swims at lunchtime in the city's Cook plus Phillips Park pool. So it's surprising to see a pair of Aboriginal mime sculptures towering by his office doorway. 2 tall, thin timber representations of the spirit people of Northern Australia. He explains their purpose. They're supposed to watch over you, give you inspiration, and be a bit cheeky. These mystical beings are part of the RBA's extensive collection of Indigenous art, started by its inaugural governor and storied public servant, H.C. Nugget Coombs. Coombs also served as inaugural chair of the Council of Aboriginal Affairs after the 1967 referendum gave the first Australians the constitutional right to be counted as Australians. He was a passionate advocate for Indigenous rights. The memes seem out of character for Lowe, but he explains that he's a lover of Indigenous art and has his own collection at home. In fact, he's also revived Coombs' connection with some of the Indigenous communities in East Arnhem Land. Lowe too seems to have an unexpected passion. In July, with 2 members of the RBA board, he visited the remote Yolnonga people of the Yirrkala. Coombs had his ashes divided between the Australian National University, which he helped found in 1946, and the Yirrkala, which is on the far northern tip of the Northern Territory, roughly as far from Darwin as it is from Indonesia. Coombs advocated for the traditional owners to share in the mineral wealth being extracted from a borax mine on their land in a landmark case. It began with the federal government appropriation of some 300 square kilometres of Yononga land without a word of consultation and gave it to a mining company, Gominco. The local people did not meekly accept, but instead wrote the famous Yirrkala Burke petitions asserting their ownership of the land. It was the beginning of a long struggle to recognise Indigenous land title. During the July trip, Lowe visited the spot where half of Coombs' ashes were buried to commemorate the man and the connection. I unveiled a plaque, big celebration, singing and dancing with spears and sticks, and it was fascinating. One of the funniest things I've done at work. He was pleased to see that the people have used the royalties from the mine now owned by Rio Tinto to invest in the community. They've also built a future fund against the day when the mine runs out. He describes it as not a great story, but a pretty good one. Well, what about Groote Eylandt in Northern Territory? What happened there with their investments, where there's nothing left? So guys, this is one good story, and I can give you another one that's even much worse. So, but I mean, it's smart that they're developing a future fund. It's probably doing a lot better than Australia's future fund. Yet, I would like the Reserve Bank to continue the connection with people of East Arnhem Land. They make sure anyone who wants employment has employment. That sounds very, very socialist to me, doesn't it? They make sure anyone who wants employment has employment. They struggle with the downside of remoteness. The bank encourages Indigenous graduates. We finally flew the Aboriginal flag. Too late, but we did it. and we have Indigenous graduates. We very much encourage Indigenous kids wherever we can see people with interest in economics, finance, technology. I'm always looking for good ideas to help in economics and drawing from my own experience, looking for people without much opportunity and giving them opportunity. Yes, but at the expense of others. At the expense of others. It's not merit-based. You're playing in identity politics and social justice. Is that appropriate for an unelected civil servant? I would argue it isn't, but then again, it lines up with the entire worldview that we're seeing here from a central banker. For the young Philip Lowe, fresh out of high school, that helping hand came in the form of an RBA bursary that paid him to work at the bank part-time and study economics at Sydney's UNSW the rest of his time. Hilariously, his parents wouldn't let him accept the offer until they travelled from Cootamundra to Sydney to interview the RBA to make sure it was worthy of their son's talents. Other than journalists, Lowe believed his parents are the only people ever to interview the central bank. It was 1980. He's worked there ever since. There you go. There you go. I mean, so he's worked his whole life for one organisation. That's nearly, 1980, 90, 2000, nearly 40 years. 40 years. The banks offered him many other opportunities, including the chance to study for his PhD at MIT. He worries about the scope of opportunity for the young today. One fashionable fear he rejects, however, is the claim that artificial intelligence and robots represent the death of work for the next generation as machines displace humans. 100% wrong, says Lowe. For every job that technology destroys, creates another one at least, and it creates higher real living standards. Really? Is it the same now as it was in the past? We'll have to see. Not with the... let's have a look here. The problem is, look at the complexity of Australia's economy. Look at what we are exporting. Okay, we are not an iron ore job or a coal job on the mines where you replace a driver with a robotic truck. Won't create as many jobs. Instead, you'll have the truck and then you have the maintenance team. You won't have the 3 shifts of drivers or the 4 shifts of drivers. You won't have the need for the crib room, where they can have a break. You won't need the toilet facilities. You won't need the cleaning. So, yeah, I think his point is correct in more advanced economies, but our civilization isn't as advanced. Our economy is 57th in the world with regards to complexity. Iron ore that we're making is a very simple export, a very simple product on the global scale of things, and that's what this chart is out of date. I think it's now 30% at the moment of our exports. So there you go, guys. That's something to question. So I'd also like to point out that jobless rates in the major Western economies today are the lowest we've had in 30, 40, or 50 years. About 30 in Australia, other than 2008 record lows, 40 in Britain, 50 in the US. Technology doesn't destroy jobs, it creates them. But what about our underemployment rate? And what about the conditions of people that are employed? I think Martin North did a video recently on his channel where he was discussing the number of people that had to have more than one job. That's the big difference. Okay? It's a different world. It's a different world. And I think in some ways, our good governor hasn't experienced some of the harshnesses of the real environment, being in his one job for 40 years. So, but he adds 2 essential conditions. One is the distribution of income that comes with that. Some of the new jobs are going to have much higher incomes than some of the older jobs. So there's a transition issue, sharply greater inequality. The other one is that individual jobs do get destroyed by technology. New jobs are created, but not necessarily for the same people. So society has to find ways to help people who lose jobs through technology to find other jobs elsewhere in the system. So if we can manage that process and somehow stop wage inequality from becoming too large, I'm confident technology will deliver higher standards of living. That's the thing. Yeah, no, I agree with that. He's got a good point there, but it's going to be a challenging time. Now, is the best way to do that one of government intervention, or is it to try and inspire private innovation? Is it to remove our liberties or to increase our liberties? What's the best way that this is going to be achieved? It's an interesting question, guys, and something to dwell on. Something I'm struggling with. I'm trying to contemplate, Particularly with the construction industry, there's more calls for more and more government regulation, and the states coming in. And fundamentally, I just have an issue with that, and trying to discover. That's why looking at the two certification methodology, where it's not just being handed over to the state, the free market can still work, trying to get innovative approaches. So, and if the political system can't manage these two side effects, then society becomes unhappy and starts looking to politicians to provide solutions to that unhappiness. My observations looking around the world is that most of the solutions being provided aren't very sensible. In other words, mad populism, and the kind that has taken over the White House and the prime ministerial offices and presidential mansions of half a dozen other nations, but so far been held at the fringes in Australia, arrives here too. Well, I would say, to me, a bigger concern is the growth of socialism. The growth of socialism, the continued chipping away at our rights. This cash ban is just another example of that. It's another liberty that's being removed. That most people go, oh, I don't need to worry about that. I don't care about that. And honestly, I never use cash. I rarely use cash. I only use cash when I go and want to buy something big. Very rare does it happen. I'm tapping the card, because it's bloody convenient. Getting the business card out, tap. It's all in the accounting books. It's done. But, it's not about convenience. It's not about convenience. It's about your liberty and your right to pick and choose. And the fact that you're rolling over and letting the state take that over. Now, that's just another step to a coercive form of government. And that's the big danger that we're seeing here. And that's slowly happening bit by bit, and people don't realize it. You've got, whether you've got a far left socialist or, right wingers and the N-words. I don't want to get demonetized on this video. They traditionally grew out of the communist socialist movement. It's all about state coercion over individual liberty. The old right left political compass, it's not how it should be seen. It should be seen as authoritarian coercion and individual freedom and liberty. It's the axis here. And that's my concern. My real concern is that we're going to head slowly to a more authoritarian system, where the government is coercing more on our individual liberty and freedoms. This morning, I did a video about the bushfires. I made reference to a video I did last year where the government pretty much fined someone $1 million because he cleared trees on his own land here in Queensland as a fire break to protect his family and his home. That's government coercion. It's the state coming and telling you what you can do. We're seeing that more and more. So, back to the article. It's entirely possible that new forms of power generation emerge that are not only good for the climate, but improve future living standards. Okay. Or we could just use fourth generation nuclear plants. I mean, come on, guys. Who cares? Why don't they build? I mean, a nuclear reactor isn't going to blow up. Okay? It's not going to blow up. What happened in Chernobyl is socialists being incompetent and human error. It's not going to happen. What happened in Japan, in Fukushima, is because they built it right near the bloody ocean. We've got all parts of Australia where they've blown up nuclear bombs. Okay? That was a tragedy that happened. So why don't you build it there? Pipe the power in. Anyway, I know there's some people that hate nuclear power for the boogeyman, but anyway. And while the RBA has recently named climate change as a source of first-order economic effects, Lowe is now not despairing at the lack of progress. Okay, so he's a social justice warrior, obviously, because he's making gender-based decisions in his employment practices, and now he's a climate change advocate. So, fantastic. Am I surprised? Not really. Kind of. I'm a bit annoyed. He recalls returning to Sydney in 1990 after studying at MIT in the US and telling his RBA managers about an exciting new communications technology called email. Why on earth would we want that? And the reply. Lowe Lowe had to write a business case for using email before the bank grudgingly introduced one account per department. His point: we had no idea 25 years ago how the world would be transformed by technology. Well, yes, and yet you believe that you can control the economy. If we address the climate, it gives us a better chance that next generations will have a better standard of living. But he thinks Australia's debate about electricity is too narrow. Okay, no, it won't. It will not have a better standard of living. If you're interested, read some of Lomborg's work. Because even if we have what they're talking about is reducing people's quality of life now for a potential tiny, insignificant change 100 years in the future, which it's even questionable if they can accurately model and which could be completely offset by a natural disaster that we could never predict. That's what they're talking about right there. And then most of the actions of these activists and these protesters actually causes more damage to the environment than doing it the other way. I mean, vegetarianism, veganism, all these claims that meat is bad, it's complete BS. There's no evidence for it that it actually is worse for the environment. Pastures capture carbon, okay? So, anyway. But naturally, I'm inherently optimistic about the ability of humans to solve problems. It's entirely possible that new forms of power generation emerge that not only are good for the climate, but improve future living standards in ways we can't dream about. Well, I agree with him 100% there. I am 100% on board with that. I think that humanity will find a way to survive, and that we will develop technology that we cannot even imagine. I mean, what would it take? One fusion plant? So what does the governor worry about? He worries about opportunities and about inequalities. He worries that Australia's education system needs to do better to equip everyone to enjoy the opportunities the country offers. And he worries that high house prices can entrench inequalities from one generation to the next. Eventually, a house gets passed to kids or grandkids and gets passed down at higher price, he says. What if you come from a family that's renting, or where the house price is not particularly high? They will find it much more difficult. And hold on, aren't you to blame, they're asking? Wasn't it the RBA, by keeping interest rates so low for so long, that created the bubble in house prices? It was a contributor, Lowe conceded, but not a primary contributor. If you ask any first-year economics student what's going to happen to housing prices, we all went to live in fantastic locations by the coast. Each person will have a large block of land, and underinvestment in transportation and allow fast-growing population growth. Please explain. I think you're going to get high house prices. Well, tremendous amount of investment in housing was foreign investment. Big part of that too. Entire projects were marketed, not even in Australia, just completely overseas. I was talking to a colleague of mine, a mortgage broker, and he was telling me that all the reporting that's recorded on foreign investment into housing, for years it wasn't done. It wasn't done accurately. No one would do it. Then they had to change the process so they actually started recording the data. So maybe it's a lot worse than we think. I wouldn't be shocked. The solution, he says, lies in this potent insight. Infrastructure investment is actually the best housing policy. How so? There's very little we can do to increase the supply of well-located land, but there's one thing you can do: build great transport. So we can increase the supply of well-located land through well-designed transport, public and private. If we can do that, the value of land that each dwelling uses will be less, people will be happier, community will be stronger, housing prices will be lower relative to income, some of the consequences for the distribution of wealth will be better. Pardon me. Okay, that's a good point. So this is going to be a long video, but it's worth going through this article to get a bit of insight into our Reserve Governor. So that's a very good point. But the problem is that one issue is just the technical ability of building the infrastructure. And we've got so many projects going on in Australia at the moment, you can reach a certain point where you overheat the sector and then the quality goes down. We can see what would happen in the apartments all around Australia. The Triangle of Fale, Mascot Towers, the Sugar Cube, Zetlands, down in Sydney there. That's what happens. So people start saying, it looks like your banks are crooked. You've got all this political dysfunction, and for a while, your cricket team was cheating. Okay? But Lowe's greatest and most urgent worry is the near future of the economy. He's recognised in public a lot more often these days compared to a few months ago. Yep, fellow train passengers are much more likely to ask for a selfie when he's on his way to work. He always agrees, by the way, because he thinks it'd be rude to do otherwise. The reason is simple. After 3 years without any movement in interest rates, the RBA in June and July decided to cut, and cut decisively. The darker the outlook, the cheaper the money. The greater the fear for the economic future, the easier Lowe wants to make it to borrow, to spend, to invest. As things turn down, Lowe wants to give you a reason to spend up. But he knows that interest rates, monetary policy, has its limit. Monetary policy cannot deliver medium-term growth. Lowe told the US Federal Reserve gathering at Jackson Hole, "We risk just pushing up asset prices," meaning a revival of the housing bubble as one potential side effect. That's concerning. Just as he is not terribly impressed with the riches in his vault, he's not terribly impressed with his own powers over interest rates alone to rescue Australia from an international abyss. That's why Lowe has campaigned relentlessly for the federal government to do more to generate economic activity. Your best option, Lowe says, is creating an environment where firms want to innovate, invest, expand, and hire people. I think that's the best option. I'm sure at the analytical level, the government would agree. The challenge they have is to develop a program to do that. Okay, here's a fundamental question for you. Do you think the government needs to develop a program to do that, or does the government need to step back to allow that to happen? And by that I mean, how many times here in Queensland, there's another controversy, I think, with the Premier's cabinet. One of her staff's husband got a $250,000 grant to develop an app. Would you consider that innovation? Because that's the type of stuff this innovation gets spent on. I remember the research and development tax credits. My landlord built a bloody extension on the back of his commercial building, and he got that all back in R&D tax credits. Is that innovation? Can the government innovate? I mean, CSIRO, they invented a lot of great achievements. Did Australia make any money off it? Did any revenue be generated off those royalties go to a future fund? What happened to it all? So there's a question for you. Should the government forcefully innovate, or should the government step back? How would you do it? How would you step back? Maybe remove payroll tax for businesses that have certain outcomes, or create special economic zones around the country with reduced taxes and reduced expenses. Maybe make it easier to employ people by making it easier to dismiss them. Those are just some simple ideas from a simple architect who likes his steins of coffee. Let me know what you think, guys, in the comments. It's interesting to consider. These things need to be discussed. So he's repeatedly called on government, state and federal to invest much more in infrastructure too. Labor's Shadow Treasurer Jim Chalmers remarks that Lowe's job is a tough gig made harder because the government won't come to the party with helpful fiscal budget policy. I sense and understand the frustration he was expressing at Jackson Hole about how monetary policy being left to do all the work. But the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, does not acknowledge any tension. He says the government is doing on infrastructure just what the governor wants. His argument is that the Commonwealth and state need to have long-term continuous pipelines of projects in construction and planning. That's what we have. And on budget spending, we both see the fundamentals of the Australian economy as strong, but pointed out challenges ahead. The Treasurer doesn't want to engage. I'm comfortable with him talking on a whole range of topics. It's not for me to tell Phil. These are the areas you can speak on. He's independent. But with Lowe making a concerted effort to stimulate growth by cutting rates, and Frydenberg committed to delivering a budget surplus, the two great arms of policy will be pulling in opposite directions, one expanding, one contracting. The point must surely come when the government will either follow Lowe's advice, or we should shut up. Josh Frydenberg, Scott Morrison be warned, the governor has no intention of shutting up. Asked whether he'd go quietly if the government no longer wished to hear his message, Lowe replied, "Certainly not. No politician has suggested he should go quiet." He attests, "I wouldn't expect that they would ever do it, partly because it'd be the wrong thing to do, and also partly because they'd know I'd ignore it. I can only see losers out there doing that. There's no benefit to come from that." The RBA is protected by its own Act of Parliament. Lowe is only 3 years through his 7-year run. The RBA's ultimate protection, however, will be that it has immensely higher levels of public confidence than any parliament or politician. It is among the country's most trusted institutions, consistently just trailing the High Court, the ABC, and the police. Wow, the ABC is trusted? Okay. Federal politicians, together with journalists, talkback radio hosts, and used car salesmen, populate the other end of the credibility scale. Oh, fantastic. The contrast between an activist central bank and a complacent federal government grows ever more obvious, the economic challenges ever more urgent. Lowe worries for his country. Up until 2 years ago, whenever I go to international meetings, people would say, "Can you tell me what's the secret of Australia's success is?" Decades of uninterrupted economic growth and fantastic profitable banks that survived the financial crisis, low unemployment, low and stable inflation, the mining boom. So what's that secret of yours? A mining boom that got lucky due to China, and 25% population growth in 18 years due to migration, no investment in large water dams or infrastructure project, or insignificant investment over that time period, and a housing bubble that drove up everyone's wealth or perceived wealth. There you go. There's the secret right there. So 2 years ago, maybe less than that, I noticed a change. People saying, what's going wrong with Australia? Maybe it started with the banks, particularly when the Royal Commission started and all these stories coming out of the banking system. So people started saying, it looks like your banks are crooked. You've got all these political dysfunction, and for a while there, your cricket team was cheating. Okay, now I get why they said that. So I've had multiple conversations on this. Your banks aren't as good as you used to think. The political system is changing leaders every year, every week, it feels like it, and your cricketers cheat. What's going on with Australia? Not all the money in Philip Lowe's vault can answer that challenge. So here's a correction. The original version of this article stated that the Treasurer's signature was on Australian banknotes. Okay, it's a Secretary of the Treasury. Okay, guys, so this is from the Good Weekend magazine by Peter Harchiter, and a political international editor. So it's interesting to get some insight into our Reserve Bank Governor, who's certainly getting much more exposure these days. What do you all think? Do you agree with some of his claims? His social justice activity is a bit frustrating, particularly for someone who's been at one job for 38 years and hasn't experienced the challenges of small business. So, I mean, I guess people who are entrenched in that environment probably don't really appreciate what a merit-based society will be anymore. Anyway, guys, let me know what you think. I know this has been a long episode. Thanks for sticking around. Like, share, and subscribe, and I will talk to you all again later. Take care.